This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. The information didn't arrive loudly. It never does. It came the way uncomfortable stories usually arrive, quietly, through an intermediary, wrapped in hesitation, passed along with the understanding that it was never meant to be repeated. Not because it was false, but because it was disruptive. Because once spoken, it couldn't be pulled back into silence. The story you're about to hear isn't gentle, it isn't clean, and it wasn't written to be flattering. It exists in the space between what the world is shown and what it is asked not to look at too closely. For years, the public consumed a version of events that felt complete. Smooth edges, perfect timing, a life story that moved forward without friction. But this is not that story. This is the story of what happens when a beginning is erased. Before the titles, before the cameras, before the carefully measured words and curated appearances, before everything became polished and public, there was a young woman still figuring out who she was. Her life wasn't symbolic yet. It wasn't meaningful to anyone beyond a small circle. It was unfinished, messy, and largely invisible. And during that time, there was someone who knew her before the edit. He wasn't part of any grand narrative. He wasn't connected to power or status. He existed outside the myth that would later be built. He knew her when nothing needed to be protected yet, when no one imagined there would one day be anything to protect at all. People like to believe the past disappears once success arrives, that old chapters dissolve when a new identity takes over. But that's not how it works. The past doesn't disappear. It goes quiet. It waits. According to whispers passed through people who once moved close to the center of this story, there were years that never made it into the official version. Not scandals, not tabloid chaos, something older, something deliberately removed. A chapter that didn't fit the future being prepared. And the strange thing is, when you start looking for it, you notice the gap. A blank space where time should be, a year that refuses to explain itself, a period that fades into silence so completely it almost feels intentional. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. To understand where it begins, you have to go back, not to glamour or ambition, but to anonymity. A small wedding chapel, not famous, not memorable, the kind of place people pass every day without noticing. It was the mid-1990s, no photographers, no audience, just two young people, barely known to anyone, and a moment that wasn't meant to last. Inside that chapel, vows were spoken quietly, no spectacle, no celebration, and then something important happened that would later be treated as if it never had. They signed papers. Legal, binding, real. For a brief moment, on record, a life changed. And then, just as quickly, it was undone. The marriage didn't end the way most marriages do. There was no public split, no lingering dispute. It ended with an annulment, a legal erasure, a way of saying not only that it was over, but that it never existed at all. In certain places, annulments move fast, faster than most people realize. When both parties agree, the law can step in and remove the event entirely, and if requested, the records can be sealed. Sealed doesn't mean hidden, it means gone. No public trace, no searchable file, no visible gap, just absence. And absence can be powerful. For someone young, unknown, and not yet shaped by public attention, an annulment like that was the perfect reset, a clean slate, a way to walk forward without dragging the past behind you. On paper, nothing had happened. But life doesn't work on paper. After that moment, something in the timeline stops making sense. The story doesn't continue, it pauses. Officially, there's an explanation. Time away, a break before the next chapter, a year spent discovering oneself. It sounds reasonable, almost charming. But when people later tried to trace it, there was nothing there. No photographs, no records, no confirmed movements, no proof of the experiences that were said to have filled that year, just silence. According to fictional accounts within this story, that year wasn't spent traveling at all. It was spent staying still, living quietly, away from attention, away from ambition, in a place far removed from where the future would later unfold. And within that quiet year, something happened that would change everything. Not loudly, not publicly, carefully. A birth. Not announced, not documented in the way the world expects, no congratulatory messages, no visible trail connecting the moment to the woman who lived it, just a child brought into the world and then folded into a different life. In this story, the child didn't disappear. She was raised, loved, protected, but under a different name, a different identity, shielded by silence. One fictional relative would later describe it simply: she was hers first. That sentence carries weight. It suggests choice. It suggests sacrifice. It suggests a decision made with the understanding that the future demanded erasure. By the time that year ended, the arrangement was complete. And then the woman vanished again. When she reappeared, everything was different. A new environment, new goals, new people. Education, structure, a life that looked clean and forward-moving, the version of her that the world would eventually meet. At the same time, contact with the past stopped entirely. No slow drifting apart, no gradual loss of connection, a full stop. The sealed marriage was never mentioned, the missing year was smoothed over, and the child, if she existed at all, was removed from the story completely. From that point on, the timeline flowed perfectly. School, career, opportunity, recess, recognition, everything aligned neatly. But stories built on silence don't stay silent forever. They wait.
Silence has a way of aging badly. What once feels controlled eventually begins to crack under the weight of time. Small inconsistencies surface. Numbers don't align, dates shift, and the story only works if no one asks the wrong questions. Years later, fictional researchers within this narrative began noticing something subtle but persistent. Photographs from earlier years showed her surrounded by people who seemed out of sync with the age she was said to be, classmates who appeared older, graduation timelines that didn't quite match, alumni materials that quietly suggested different dates. At first, it could be dismissed as coincidence, one mislabeled photo, one clerical error, but it didn't stop there. It happened again and again. Older records hinted at alternative timelines, not dramatically different, but enough to matter. Enough to make the missing year feel less like a break and more like a deliberate gap. If those alternative dates were closer to the truth within this fictional world, something important changed. The early marriage made more sense. The quiet year fit more comfortably. The timeline stopped fighting itself. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. And once that happens, coincidence becomes pattern. People often assume official documents are fixed forever, untouchable. But history, real and fictional alike, shows that records can be adjusted, amended, and reframed, especially when control is involved. In this story, years after the woman's life became public, a document tied to a major milestone was quietly altered. Not destroyed, not denied, just changed. An explanation was offered, administrative, routine, nothing to see. But those close to the process knew better, because it hadn't been done before. And if a visible document could be amended under scrutiny, then what about older ones? High school files, court records, travel logs from decades earlier, files that were sealed, records that no longer needed to exist. Control doesn't require destruction, only access. Once that possibility exists, everything else takes on new meaning. The annulment, the missing year, the sealed files, they stop feeling random. They feel coordinated. If the child from that quiet year existed in this story, she wouldn't be a child anymore. She would be grown, living her own life, carrying a truth she may or may not fully understand. According to imagined recollections, there was always someone there, a presence at family gatherings, never explained, never introduced, simply accepted. She's part of us, one fictional voice remembered, but no one talks about how. For years, that silence held, until it didn't. In this story, word eventually surfaced that the woman, now grown, had a child of her own, another generation entering the world without acknowledgement, another life beginning quietly. If true within this fictional narrative, the implication is staggering. It suggests that the story isn't just about the past, it's about what happens when erased chapters start forming new ones. Here's where everything converges. The sealed annulment, the year that vanished, the quiet birth, the adjusted records, the timelines that only work if no one looks too closely. Individually, each element could be explained away. Together, they form something else entirely. Not a scandal, but a long-term strategy of silence. And this is where the man who knew the beginning matters. He didn't build the myth, he didn't benefit from the rewrite, he simply existed before the story was simplified. According to fictional whispers, he never spoke loudly. He didn't need to. His silence did the work for him. Because silence, in the end, is not the same as denial. Secrets don't disappear. They wait. They sit in sealed files. They linger in forgotten photographs. They echo in conversations that stop halfway through a sentence. And sometimes they return through the one thing no document can erase: blood. If someone raised in silence ever learns the truth of where they came from, that moment doesn't just rewrite history, it changes what comes next. Because no title, no carefully maintained narrative, and no sealed file can hold forever against the simple human need to know who you are. The real question in this story isn't whether the chapter exists, it's what happens when it finally opens.